Hi, everyone. It's Susan, and I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about Mercury and its journey through Scorpio and then into Sagittarius and then back. And as I'm making this recording, it's when the sun has just ingressed Scorpio. So as of the 22nd, actually, the sun ingressed Scorpio, and it's just in the first arc, 15 arc minutes of the sign as I'm doing this. And this is following on the new moon that we had at the end of Libra. So the sun and the moon are still tracking each other. And Mercury and Venus, Mercury and Mars even are still tracking each other. So Mercury, Mars have been together basically since last Saturday, but they perfected their conjunction on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Basically, they kind of scanned 18, 19, and 20 degrees of Scorpio. And this means that because Mars is at home in Scorpio, it's been a very scorpionic time. And the Mars Mercury signature in Scorpio is about revelation of secrets and revelation of things that are also kind of core, getting to the meat and potatoes, let's say, of a situation. I've already done a video that includes the groundwater trine, but I will be talking about it a lot because it keeps getting triggered over the next few weeks and really up until the beginning of December. So this is a theme of the moment. And I just want to reiterate, as I have said in many videos, if you're paying attention, that a trine is not doesn't mean it's going to bring good things. It just means that things flow. Things flow in a way that allows for things to continue or to be harmonious or to work together. Now, what is the thing that is working together is the question. If it's a war, it just keeps flowing. It doesn't mean peace is on the way. If it's a love relationship, well, that might also mean that the love patterns are continuing. Are they good or are they bad for the individuals concerned? That's another question. So the trine allows things to move forward in a flowing way. And we have to look at the nature of the planets and the connection between them as the trine is coming together and what is the quality of the moment. And the rulers and all of those things will dictate the quality of that trine. So yes, it's of the nature of Jupiter. Jupiter just brings more. It brings more. And the question is more of what? Well, we would hope that since Jupiter is part of this groundwater trine and is, as I'm making this recording, it's also about to be trined by Mercury. It's extremely favorable for communication and perhaps also revelation of secrets or an awareness of something. Now, that Jupiter is in strong, strong dignity. Mars itself is at its home sign. So, again, very, very powerful. Soon enough, Mars will also be in a trine with Jupiter just a couple of days from now. And Jupiter is also approaching the trine with Saturn, and it's ruling Saturn. And of course, this is also the day after Neptune moved back into Pisces. That was my recent video. You'll see more about that. So Neptune in Pisces is adding to the trine. It's adding to more of this intensity around this moment in time. Piscean, Scorpionic, and Cancerian, meaning that there's a lot of water. There's a lot of things that are under the radar, things that are either hidden or deep and profound and not necessarily going to be in our awareness until more air and fire comes into the picture. That's 2026. And so when things are very watery in the elemental sense, astrologically speaking, we're not always really aware of what's going on. Things are especially with Scorpio, especially with Scorpio. Those are the deep waters where there's a lot going under the surface. And Pisces too, it's not always showing what is actually going on. So there are three stages, let's say, to the Mercury story. So maybe there's a lot more than that. There are a number of stages to the Mercury story. One of which includes this Mercury combining with Mars. And we'll keep looking at that as we go forward in time, because Mercury conjoined Mars, as I said, over the last few days at 18, 19, 20 degrees of Scorpio. And they're still technically conjoined, so they've only just moved away from what we call perfection of the aspect of the conjunction, but they're still very much operating together. And then because Mercury goes ahead into Sagittarius and then followed by Mars, Then Mercury will station at 6 degrees, almost 7 degrees. So let's see, the degree is 6 degrees, 51 arc minutes of Sagittarius. So it's very close to 7 degrees. It's in the seventh degree of Sagittarius. And that's on the 9th of November. So it actually moves into Sagittarius on the 29th of October. And then it stations at almost 7 degrees of Sagittarius. And it will go back to the place that it was where we had the new moon. And so roughly at the new moon, the shadow for Mercury began. And what a shadow represents is where the planets are going to move from and then back to in the retrograde cycle. And it's interesting because usually events that are happening around the shadow will come back and become relevant and be maybe explained or understood or resolved over the course of the cycle of the retrograde. So it's not only in the moment that a planet is retrograde, but it's in the course of the degrees that it's moving from and then back to that we can glean a lot of information. And so this is what I'm going to sort of poke at today. This will be the case for you in your individual life. So if you think about the reference point being, let's say, Monday to Tuesday, as that new moon came into effect, but the Tuesday specifically, the 21st of October, was when Mercury entered into its shadow. So 20 degrees, I think it was 20 degrees, 40 arc minutes of a degree was the exact shadow. I think 42, there we go. So 20 degrees, 42 arc minutes. By the way, that's when it will station direct on the 29th of November. So 29th of October, Mercury leaves Scorpio, but it's not until the 29th of November that we have the direct station of Mercury. And then it continues to move back through all of those degrees throughout much of December. So we're looking at a long arc of many, many weeks of this retrograde. And that cycle will dominate, and I'll keep coming back to that because that Mercury retrograde cycle will dominate this period of the season or this period of our lives. I don't normally make videos about Mercury retrograde, except that this one in particular speaks very loudly to all of the other aspects of the chart that we've been looking at as unusual, atypical, rare, significant. And that means that there's going to be a number of things that we're working with that are going to create events in our lives that will be memorable or will be significant, will bring about change. So Mercury in Scorpio is very much about understanding things on a profound level, digging out the secret aspects of things, digging out maybe what's a little bit the underbelly of things even, and also about overcoming issues of fear, issues of trauma, issues of mistrust as well. That can be something quite constructive if it's used consciously. And then when we bring Mercury into Sagittarius, it's going to be a little bit less in dignity in the sense that Mercury doesn't have a specific dignity in Scorpio, except that the fact that it's with Mars, just like the moon, which is also with Mars, they absorb the energy of the planets that they're with. And so Mercury takes on a Mars-like quality. So it's a little bit more energetic or testy or the knives get out, basically. And when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, then it becomes under the dominance of Jupiter, which is in really strong dignity, except that Mercury is in its detriment in Sagittarius, because Mercury is about details and it's about what we need to understand in a kind of a fact-based, practical nature. And a Jupiter-dominated Mercury, whether it's in Sagittarius or Pisces, is, although it can be incredibly broad-minded and lots of awareness of different facts coming together, different big picture visions of things, it is also challenged because it takes on too big a picture. It needs to break things down into chunks. And so it can gloss over the facts, or it can be too philosophical, too high-minded, and not very realistic. So these are the things that you can consider at that time. So also around the 29th of October, when Mercury moves into Sagittarius, it's going to oppose Uranus, because Uranus is going only to move back into Taurus on the 7th of November. And so, for about a week, for several days around that time, the end of October, beginning of November, Mercury and Uranus are in opposition. And that will continue to hold again because Mercury will go back over those degrees, even when Uranus goes back into Taurus and Mercury going back into Scorpio will also create this opposition. So, we can expect on a number of different levels quite big surprises, big news flashes, big details around stories that are really relevant or really important that are coming up in ways that are surprising or insightful or new and even old. So stories that are very old and things that are being brought back, especially through the Mercury retrograde. And and one of those stories can be, for example, the events that happened earlier this week, a few days ago, around Prince Andrew, who's no longer able to use his royal titles or many of his royal titles, although he's a prince by birth. So that's part of how they designate him. And the scandals that have been brewing around him. So I'm going to pull up his chart and look at that. And before I do, I want to emphasize that aside from the Mercury story, which is huge in this weekend, the stories that we're going to look at, I'm also going to look at the Japanese Prime Minister. The very first time Japan has actually elected a female Prime Minister, and that also happened when Mercury entered its shadow phase, and still with the Mercury Mars conjunction. And we will expect another Mercury-Mars conjunction with Mercury retrograding at 6 degrees of Sagittarius. So that's again part of the bigger story that goes into November. Um, I'll keep you posted as we go forward because these are things that are going to be picking up on the threads that I'm trying to point out here, and you can keep that in mind for your own life as well. And so pardon me if you speak Japanese, I apologize for this pronunciation. The woman's name is Sane Takaichi, I think. Takaichi. So I hope that's close to what her name sounds like to you. And she is the first prime minister of Japan. And then the third story I want to pick up on around this time, and why I want to pick up on this is because I think we are going to revisit these stories specifically. And I'm also trying to take things out of the news that are not to do with Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, and Israel, and so on. And I know they're hugely important, but we also have to look broader and see what else is going on in the world, or we just go insane. So, or at least I'm speaking for myself, the royal we will go insane. So I'm looking at these three things just to offer different perspectives on the moment in time, because they also have a broader cultural influence. And then the third one is the Louvre and the robbery, this astonishing robbery that happened at 9:30 in the morning on Sunday, in broad daylight, to one of the world's most, if not the most important, certainly the most famous museum in the world. And I do want to look at that chart as well. So we're going to combine all of these different things. Then we'll go sign by sign only for the Mercury movement. I can't keep drawing in absolutely everything, or I'll just be here all day long. Let me just check that I've told you everything I need to about the Mercury journey. So again, you'll see when we're looking at this, you will see how the groundwater trine is not always about something great happening or something like, yay, this happened. It's something that has happened in a way that is creating a consistent sort of movement of energy or consistent pattern that is that requires a square, an opposition, or some conjunction to unlock the flow. You see, it's like a dam, if you like, in a river. If the water just keeps flowing and flowing, well, that's fine. The water's just flowing, but it's very hard to stop the river. So you need a different momentum. You need a square. You need an opposition. You need something to interject, or nothing will change. Nothing will. So this is about stimulus for change. So 21st of October was the shadow, and that was from 20 degrees 42 minutes of Scorpio. So 29th of October is when Mercury moves into Sagittarius. The retrograde of Mercury almost at 7 degrees, 6 degrees 51 minutes of Sagittarius will happen on the 9th of November. And then Mercury goes back into Scorpio on the 19th. And again, around that time, it would be 17, 18, 19, 20 of November that Mercury will once again be in opposition to Uranus. So again, we can expect revelations and interesting surprises, interesting revelations, interesting dynamics, because that again picks up whatever is picking up Uranus is also picking up the trine that's ongoing with Pluto. And if we lose the trine by sign, we still keep it by degree, so that's still relevant there. And also the fact that Neptune is still very much in a sextile with this Neptune, and that puts it very much in a trine to the Mercury going back and forth over the border with Sagittarius and Scorpio. Now, Neptune trining Mercury, and especially because Mercury in Sagittarius can tend to exaggerate or gloss over the facts or speak its opinion as opposed to what is factual. Sort of, give your answer first, verify later. This, with the combination of a trine to Neptune, can create some challenges in grasping what is true and real. So luckily, then we get the influence of Saturn in the trine, which says we need to do better. We need to make this real. And then ideally, again, with the notion that with Jupiter, we're asking for something to be more in integrity or more high-minded or wiser, using a broader sense of wisdom, ideally. And then the Jupiter itself, and I'll do a separate video on that, will actually station retrograde on the 11th of November. So it's going to be holding that 25 degrees, just as Saturn is holding its 25 degrees through most of November, both of them trining each other. So that means that as Mercury comes back to this point, it's going to recreate that grand trine that we're experiencing right now. So it's quite the few weeks. This is a really interesting time. What I would suggest is that we pay close attention to what is being revealed at this time and follow the trail, follow the breadcrumbs, because it will have lasting impact, especially with these planets that are slow moving. When we're involving Mercury with the dynamic of Mars, that is a cycle of Mercury-Mars that keeps repeating now over the next few weeks. And then especially the trine between Jupiter and Saturn, which is also a time marker, and then involving Neptune on top of that, these are going to have a long-term impact, a long-term response. So if we come to Prince Andrew, might as well start with him. And then later I will do your sign by sign, but again, only just for the Mercury part, because enough is enough. Where are we? Andrew. We're going to call him Andrew Windsor because, yeah, he's lost the Duke of York title. I will every now and then call him Prince Andrew because I'm old enough to have that sort of melded into my mind. I grew up in Canada where he was at boarding school, so it was all over the freaking newspapers. I guess I was like late 70s, early 80s or something like that. They shipped him off to Canada. I was already a troublemaker then. And why am I pointing here? Oh, yes, why this is very important. So if we talk about Uranus going through Taurus, I mentioned this in a blog in May or April of 2018, which I have posted in my community section in the comments, what nobody reads. Nobody of you seems to understand that I post things also on YouTube, but as a post. So I invite you to check that out and read some of the things that I post there, because there can be added details to what's going on, both in terms of what I'm offering, but also in terms of the astrology. I posted it a while back. In terms of the Uranus going through Taurus, aside from all of the different things that disrupt the economy and that disrupt our whole sense of values and so on, which has been true since May 2018. The one big, strong feature, the big impact of Uranus going through Taurus was to the British monarchy, a complete and total transformation of the British monarchy. And this is the final chapter of that transformation as we go forward into Uranus staying in Gemini. Now, Uranus in Taurus is in the 10th house for Andrew. So if I go forward, I'll just go forward a few weeks and we see when Uranus goes back. It's back in the 10th house for Andrew. And in this whole period of time, since June, but also, it's an extended transit that probably he's been feeling this since 2024 in a very powerful way. Uranus has been squaring his sun and squaring his Chiron. Later next year, we'll be squaring Pluto. This is a major, major life change. This is huge life change for all of anyone who's got a Uranus square Pluto dynamic or a Uranus Chiron dynamic. I've seen a lot of people this week seem to have those signature that I've been seeing in my private readings. Uranus also opposed his moon, and that would reflect also the change of relationship with his mother, the dynamic with his mother. That the moon, where we see Andrew's moon, is also his mother's, meaning the Queen Elizabeth II, and that's her Saturn, roughly, within half a degree or so. And that also keeps the square. It created a T-square then, going back to this past winter, meaning early 2025 and late 2024, and even all the way through 2024. It kept a T-square with his natal Chiron and then squaring the sun. So this Uranus ties in, and also, by the way, Saturn coming back to the South Node. So I want to just pin that for a minute, because in 1936, when Edward VIII abducted, didn't abduct, he didn't take away anybody, he abdicated the throne. That was the 10th of December, 1936. The ostensible reason, the reason given, the fake reason given, was that he was marrying a divorcee, an American who'd been married twice already, and that was considered shameful. And of course, socially, that was absolutely feasible because that was considered, or especially for a royal, for a king, inappropriate. But the real reason was that he was a traitor and he was a Nazi sympathizer and famously anti-Semitic as well. So an actual friend, personal friend and supporter of Adolf Hitler. Remember that the Windsor family changed their name during the Second World War to reflect their properties in the town of Windsor in the UK, where their actual name is Saxe-Coburg, which is the royal name throughout Europe. There are many Saxe-Coburg throughout Europe, which is a German name. Obviously, the Saxons are Germans. And that Saxe-Coburg family can be found in every European royal family because they would intermarry, and especially between the Germans and the Brits. And of course, Tsar Nicholas, who was executed by the Soviets, the Bolsheviks precisely, was direct cousins of Edward VIII. So, and that's one of the reasons they say that perhaps he was more of a Nazi sympathizer, a Hitler sympathizer, because he was against the Soviets. So there can be these personal affinities. Anyway, point being, Uranus was in Taurus at that time. So that was the Dust Bowl. That was the Depression era. That was the pre-war era. That was the era of massive social change in the 30s. That was the era of massive war buildup that mirrors our time now. And Saturn was also in Pisces at that time. And the Saturn as we're looking at it today, going forward, if we just specifically look at today, we have Saturn already approaching the South Node that we find in Andrew's chart. And Uranus again is already very, very tightly in a square to his sun. This is a moment in time that will not just define Andrew and his experience of his life, but it will define the royal family, and it will define also the way that Britain sees itself. Because up until recently, let's say up until the 90s, everybody was on all hands on deck for the royals. They were absolutely a non-negotiable plus for the UK, according to the majority opinion. It was very much a fragment of society who thought that they were a bunch of layabouts and ne'er-do-wells who were basically living on the dole, as it were, because the British taxpayer pays for them. And And it turns out, guess what? There are a bunch of layabouts and ne'er-do-wells. And now people are starting to see that more and more. And over the last 30 years, since the death of Princess Diana, itself relatively suspicious, people have been turning against the royals. And in different ways, each royal has played their part, his or her role. But Andrew has been probably the most significant. Now, I want to point out that when Andrew, let's go back a few years. When Andrew went to see his friend Jeffrey Epstein, that was in November of 2010. So in November 2010, we'll just move this forward a few weeks. So I'm going to say mid-November. I can't remember exactly the date, but it was like around the second or third week of November. The 19th stands out, but that might be wrong. But anyway, November 2010 for sure. He went to New York to see his friend Jeffrey, who had by then already been convicted of child sex offenses and very lightly sentenced, given very special treatment. Now, what we find is a number of really interesting dynamics in this chart based on that visit to New York. Keep in mind, this is not just an individual. This is an individual who represents the royal family and at that time was the trade representative for the United Kingdom. Not just a royal, but he was very much a prominent figure and a working royal for the United Kingdom. And that's why this stands out. This is very important in that sense. So here we have Saturn squaring Saturn. This is a challenge. This is something that becomes and there's a need to modify behavior when there's a big square like this, especially Saturn squaring Saturn. It's like, okay, there's something I need to do differently here. And Saturn in his chart is also opposed by Black Moon Lilith. It's in the house of the family, the ancestry, what is hidden, what is secret. And then we also have, and that also, of course, was Scorpio season, because of course it is. And here we also have this story of the Mars and Mercury conjunction. So that would have happened the few days later. I mean, again, if it was on the 19th, I should have checked that. But if it was on, maybe I did put that down there. I unfortunately I didn't write that down. But let's say even if it was within a week, this is the Mars Mercury conjunction, and that is also happening around the time that we're mirroring right now. So again, keep this in mind because we're in cycles that are repeating in quite a dramatic way. Now, Mars is exactly trining the ascendant. It's in the house of sexuality. It's in the house of fun. It's in the house of gambling, taking risks. That's where he has his Jupiter. So again, when we see a Jupiter really strong in the fifth house, but ruling a South Node, Mercury, and Sun in the eighth house, we know that there's something a little bit secretive or not entirely above board. And we'll look a little bit more at the natal chart configuration here, and it has a lot to do with the father. So I'll get to that in a minute. The other thing that stands out here is that Pluto is on the North Node. So what is that? Pluto on the North Node is about more. It's about more power. It's about encountering something that feels compulsive. So compulsion enters into this whole story, and it's part of the dynamic here with the South Node in the eighth from a psychological point of view, especially with a Venus-Mars conjunction in a very interesting sextile to that South Node, trining the North Node, and in a sextile to the Moon as well. So Mars is ruling the Moon for him, a Scorpio Moon. So compulsion is another word that we want to keep in mind here. And powerful people, powerful what in the sixth house? Powerful patterns of behavior. It can be from his perspective, but also powerful enemies. So the sixth house is the house of open enemies. So seventh house is like opponents. It's whatever the person is that you're engaging with. I tend to take the Indian bent on the sixth house being real open enemies, the 12th house being hidden enemies, which makes sense because they're in opposition. And the seventh house being the opponent in the sense of I know who I'm dealing with. And also this is how I engage with them. But the sixth house is where things start to go pear-shaped. And he has a lot going on in the sixth house. So that he's there are issues here at the time he's born and even before. And the way that I look at the natal chart, we see that this is already a dilemma going on in the marriage of the parents. There's already something going on there. Issues of morality versus duty, issues of morality versus commitment are very strong in this particular chart. Indulgence, self-indulgence, the Jupiter in the fifth house, and also honesty, secrets, dishonesty, also part of the story. So that Pluto North Node is very interesting because that's also where we see these powerful enemies, powerful people that are that he's engaging with. And of course, that's exactly who Jeffrey Epstein is or was. And that is also coming into his Pluto trine. So we see this is also a huge moment for him. But again, remember that whatever is going on in his life is also modeling or mirroring what is going on in the royal family and the status of the royal family. Now, here we have Uranus with Jupiter on the south node. So Uranus and Jupiter in the eighth house get up to no good, really. That's sexual peccadillos, that's challenges. Now, if in an elevated individual's chart, the best case scenario is this person is deeply spiritual. They're going through, they're accessing their higher intelligence, their higher wisdom. They're working with the occult, which may also be true, but not in a nefarious way necessarily. But this has not been the type of behavior that we've seen of Prince Andrew. He's notoriously unpleasant. He's notoriously difficult with his staff, rude to people, brings prostitutes, had many, many years been bringing prostitutes to the royal palace, circumventing the rules to bring them in. And of course, nobody said anything because he was the queen's favorite son. And they did indeed have a very, very strong bond, which allowed him to get away with all of the things that we know he's been getting away with very little consequences. The other aspect of this is he's in, at this time of 10th of November, he's in the Chiron Neptune, which is an already dynamic, interesting dynamic return. So his Chiron return will influence him in terms of how he feels connected or in relationship to relationship in general, the marriage, his own marriage. That was a very long process of clarification around his wife, who never fully really left his side. They were in many ways doing making use, let's say, of their status for personal gain. Both of them. I'm not going to ignore the moon, but it's interesting just that as I flip this open, if we were drawing a tarot card, I'd say, well, this is really significant that the moon itself is in a direct opposition to Uranus. On the ascendant, we see that also referencing Leo on the ascendant. There's something different about the way this person shows up. That can be, again, a super big plus. That can be somebody who's incredibly artistic, very gifted, but especially because the sun in the eighth house doesn't see the ascendant. It's called inconjunct or quincunx. It's hidden. And there's something a little bit odd going on here with reference to the father and the relationship of the father and what the father was doing. Now, Prince Philip, his father, was also a noted philanderer and even PDF file. And that is something that is worth considering because these are patterns that repeat. The eighth house is what we inherit. He inherits a lot of tendencies from his father with the sun there. And equally including, dishonesty or not, at the very least, not being entirely open. It's a Mercury in detriment and fall on the south node, very cagey, very secretive. And again, I know this can also be extremely, spiritual. It can be a deeply spiritual aspect, but we just also have to look at the person we're looking at and say this has not been what they're manifesting in this lifetime. So the Chiron return is always a time to really go back over the actual issue, which is that I don't know how I fit in. I don't know how I can't connect with my father. So we have an out of sign conjunction here. Cannot connect with my father, even if Chiron were there. The fact that it's an eighth house sun also and especially in Pisces, which for a Leo ascendant particularly refers to a father who just did not provide boundaries, but himself also broke boundaries, did not adhere to rules, did not adhere to the law, did not adhere to the establishment, what the minions would have to adhere to, for example. And that applies in everyday life for anyone who has this configuration. There's a lack of support, boundaries, presence of the father figure, lack of structure, and this can have serious implications for the individual's relationships and their own experience of self and their ability to get stuff done, get stuff going. And we saw that with Andrew. It just always felt like his whole life was like an ongoing experiment. Anyway, so there we are. That's the meeting in New York City, November 2010, with his good friend Jeffrey Epstein. Then we find going forward a couple of months into February of 2011. February 2011 is when he wrote the email to Jeffrey Epstein that said, "We're in this together. We are, I'm your best pal. Don't you worry. You know, all these people say nasty things about you molesting children and young girls. Don't worry. I'm here." And that's after having said that he went to New York City in 2010 for those 4 days that he stayed in Jeffrey Epstein's house to tell him that their relationship was done, that it was over. Now look at what's coming up here. So we have Uranus that's moving towards the critical degree of Pisces that's coming up. Chiron has just moved over his sun. That's his self-image, his image of himself, his ability to, again, with the original wounding or the original issue, to acknowledge or become aware of his own boundaries. Neptune is in a sextile to his Jupiter. It just so happens that we're tracking again the Mars and Mercury coming together in the seventh house, again, of relationships, and that is also perilously close to the opposition with this Uranus. So again, this issue of who do I contend with in terms of the relationships in my life? Who can I trust? We're getting to this point now where Neptune is crossing beyond Chiron, and 1 month later, it is going to move into Pisces. And so Neptune is going into the position that Chiron had been in directly on his sun. So it actually was at the end of Pisces. I think it was the very last day of Pisces. When did it go in? Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, not Pisces, March. So it's just the beginning of April that we had that. So let's say the 5th of April, Neptune went into Pisces, and that's where it joined his sun. Now we're at the end of the Neptune in Pisces story. As of the time that I'm doing this video, we're ending that story. And it's coming also to the critical degree, the next critical degree, which is the last degree of the sign and the zodiac as it happens, where there's an enormous amount of activity currently with Neptune and Saturn. And this is where we've been focusing a lot of our attention in 2025. The other aspect of this is that Uranus is also where we find Neptune, Saturn in 2025. And that's where we're going to find them again in February, March of 2026. Keep that in mind because that will recall these are like triggers. They keep repeating. Now, Mercury is retrograding with Aries on the midheaven at this time. And so this is around the time that people are starting to talk. This is when the tongues start to wag around Andrew's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. So this was known at the time. It just wasn't widely broadcast. Things did not really start to take on, let's say, a lot of visibility until the sort of 2017 period, 2018 period, when Uranus went into Taurus. Remember the Me Too movement and so on. So just keep all this in mind as we come to now. Again, as I said, when Uranus goes into Taurus, it's going to go through all of the different, let's say, juxtapositions or traumas or painful readjustments for the royal family of the United Kingdom that it did the last time in the 30s when it was there, along with Saturn in Pisces. So this is a moment in time where we're looking also at a huge transformation of the royal family. And that's not just about the individuals concerned. It has implications for the UK itself. And I've shown you in other videos how the UK is affected by recent transits. And I'll keep talking about these things as they come up, but we're in a phase of immense transformation around the the nation of the United Kingdom itself, in Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And so this is the dynamic that we're in currently, where Chiron was in the Chiron return and then over the sun. We're now with Chiron and Aries on the midheaven. Chiron will station on his midheaven at the end of this year. So I think it's the 30th of December or the 31st of December. And it will turn around, I think, on the 2nd of January. So maybe it's the 1st of January that it stations, and it's going to move direct by the 2nd of January. It's direct again from his midheaven. So all of these different significators are showing us the journey that Andrew is going to be taking in terms of his sense of self, but also his reputational story. So often when Neptune crosses the sun of a usually, I mean, it has to be a famous person, but it can also be an individual in their own experience. Neptune crossing the sun or crossing a significant point in the chart can cause reputational damage. And that's all the more so, again, depending on what other things are triggered. And we saw that a lot was being triggered at the same time with Neptune crossing that sun. So that's the beginning of the journey of reputational damage, which is now in its concluding phase between now and February. But this story continues well beyond into the spring. So Andrew is being decimated by his own past, basically. So it's very difficult to find a sympathetic word for him, except that he's born into this absolutely atrocious family pattern of misbehavior and infidelity and secrets, and combined with a sense of duty and obligation that is actually a bit resented, more than a bit resented. There's an entitlement here. And again, that's not everyone who has this, but when you combine all of these things with Jupiter in the 5th house, ruling the sun, the Mercury South Node, and then ruling the 5th house of pleasure and gambling and taking risks and love and fun and children and so on, personal creativity and so on. It's challenging. It's got a lot to do with Jupiter. And what was Jupiter? Jupiter did what he liked, basically. Jupiter did what he pleased. Jupiter in the 5th house brings a lot of self-indulgence. This is the way it goes. Jupiter is also in a square with the nodal axis. And it's this nodal axis, remember, that is where the Saturn station will take place. And it's already happening. It's already very much in conjunction, but it's going to be through November, particularly strongly until the 28th when Saturn stations direct, basically on his south node. And that is maintaining this natal square that he has with Jupiter within about 3 degrees. Not even, actually. It's yeah, just over 3 degrees, which is pretty tight in a natal chart. So Jupiter squaring the nodes suggests that is one of the greater life lessons that requires a deeper understanding. So Jupiter in Sagittarius ideally is in good dignity. It is a placement where there's a lot of benefit. We see that he's born into a family with nothing but privilege and benefit. And that also describes his father, it describes his mother, it describes so much of what is what this family represents. But again, there's this question of entitlement. This is the big drawback, the big issue. The Neptune in a square to the ascendant-descendant axis also contributes to this. There's something not clear in the royal household. There's something not open and honest in the royal household. And that's worth pointing out as well. The square from the Neptune to the ascendant suggests also that things are not what they appear to be. And that can contribute to a certain degree of dishonesty or not. Again, things are not what they appear to be. Let's leave it at that. Have I said all the things I wanted to say? So basically what I'm showing here is how this grand water trine, that again is supposed to be so hugely beneficial and can be, in certain circumstances, given certain natal charts, is going to come back and bite Andrew in the backside multiple times. And this is going to be something that he will not be able to relinquish. It will contaminate him. I'm using that word specifically in this case. it will contaminate him for a long, long time to come. And this will kind of force him underground, or it will force him into a position of serious ostracism. And this is another quality that can show up with the Scorpio, is it having to go underground, quite literally. Right, and so this is going to impact his moon. That references his mother. So again, this everyone keeps saying, "Oh my God, thank God his mother's not alive." Well, she knew what was going on. She was the one who pitched up the $12 million that he gave to Virginia Giuffre, who he says he never knew, and who accused him in a civil lawsuit um, of abusing her on multiple occasions when she was still a minor, 17-year-old girl. And the book that she wrote posthumously, because she was writing the book while she ended up dying last April under profoundly mysterious circumstances that were attributed to a suicide. Despite the fact that she specifically said, "I am not suicidal," this is something that is going to keep coming back and back and back. The question of his mother, the honor to the royal family, the family in general, because this is the fourth house, the lineage, the honor of the lineage, and the difficulties that he's having that are coming from his past, relationships or his past behavior. Now he's having a reverse nodal. He had already a reverse nodal return that happened in the early part of 2020. Let's say would have been May, June, I guess, of 2025. And that North Node is now exactly on Mercury, which is part of the problematic energy of his chart, in an inconjunct to that Uranus retrograde in Leo. Lying to save his reputation, for example, would be one way of seeing that. And that Mercury is the focus of this moment with that North Node. And then the trine is also with Jupiter in the 12th house, again, referring back to ancestors and secrets and things that are hidden, things that are unconscious or unknown. And that is in a very, very strong opposition right now to Mars. And of course, it's a weak opposition to Venus, but still very much in play. Now, Jupiter will retrograde back to an opposition with his Saturn. Jupiter comes back to 15 degrees of Cancer. And I think the direct station is in February. No, it's the 11th of March of 2026. And at that point, we're going to also see a recollection of this circumstance as we're experiencing it now. The pileup here in Scorpio is a mirror or a reflection or a kind of a repeating pattern, if you like, in terms of the water dynamic of the bigger pileup that was happening from January through March, April of 2025, where everything was in Pisces. Everything was there in that 8th house for him, of secrets, of inherited patterns, of things that are inherited trauma, inherited family stories and events and money, literally, as well. And so this is a big, long story that is now pulling deeper into his own personal psychological state. And I'd say he's not in a good place, to be sure, at this time, because he's got Mercury, Mars pressing up against his already fallen moon, and then that's where the trine to Saturn and Jupiter are going to keep up the pressure through the entire month of November from now, entire month of November and into December. Then Jupiter will come back. Saturn will not come back to that, but Jupiter will come back and repeat that trine in, I guess, April, May. So this is a long arc of story. This will apply to anyone who has things that are around 23, let's say 23 to 27 degrees, or really we could even say, 20 to 30 degrees of the water signs. Really 20 to 30 degrees of the water signs will be deeply impacted, or even more if we include the North Node. But okay, we have to draw the line somewhere. So all I'm pointing out here is something to pay attention to. Notice that as of today and tomorrow, so this is Thursday and Friday, London time, because he lives in Windsor. But that's the other thing about the moon. The moon represents house and home, especially here in the 4th house. And that is suggestive of something that requires change. And this will be the pattern of Mercury going back and forth over this moon. He's on the border of, like, he's ready to be kicked out, even by a parliamentary declaration, if he doesn't go willingly. So this will be the Mercury retrograde story for Andrew, that he has to figure out where he's going to live. This will be a really big moment in time that will be quite a game changer, psychologically, emotionally. Will be bringing up quite a lot of suffering and a completely different relationship with that Pluto already going through the seventh and in a semi-sextile to his sun, which, by the way, I feel are really powerful. Never overlook semi-sextiles from slow-moving planets, especially something like Pluto. Well, obviously Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus, but especially Pluto, which takes so long. The semi-sextile to an important planet is going to show you something of what is changing, and it's coming through a slow burn, basically. So, and that, of course, is emphasized this time around by the square from Uranus. Okay, I think we've covered Andrew far more than I actually wanted to, but I needed to pull in the piece of the abdication and all of the other things to show you the importance of this moment, because there is just such a significant overlap. It's not random. We're repeating a cycle that is extremely, extremely important. And let me just take up this, have I got this chart today? Abdication chart. Yeah, let's have a look. I just wanted to look at the abdication chart to see what else is about that. Yeah, the moon was in Scorpio then at the abdication, which was the 10th of December. Jupiter was in fall and ruling. Sorry, Jupiter was in detriment and ruling. No, that's in fall. Sorry, in Capricorn, it's exalted in Cancer and in fall in Capricorn, and then it's ruling the North Node, midheaven, and Sun. So again, it's a reputational damage, reputational struggle with the population. Mercury again is involved in this story, and then Venus herself values. Values and relationships are suffering with the Venus in an opposition here with Pluto in Cancer, which is again a representation of a complete transformation around the family. What I forgot to mention, and even here we have the Chiron on the South Node, in a very strong opposition on the IC, which represents the family, the lineage, and the image of the family, the image of the royal family in terms of the projection onto the sun midheaven. So there's an opposition here to the literal king, sun on the midheaven, ruled by this Jupiter that is in fall. And here's that Saturn again in Pisces. Here it's at mid-Pisces. So this is in fact where the North Node is right now. The North Node is about to cross the Saturn of the abdication, and the South Node has just been on the Neptune of the abdication. So I think I have made the point that this is going to be something immense around the damage that is being done to the royals at this point. Oh, and even look at that. Of course, because that particular nodal axis was at 24 degrees, this is also where Saturn stationing at 25 degrees is going to be having a huge impact. Chiron Aries at 24, 25 degrees between now and 2026 is also in a sextile to that and trining from the house of values. This is again to recall that even though a chart is not active in this moment, also here's the Mars of the abdication with the midheaven of this moment that I'm just showing you randomly, you see. So it's just interesting how these things keep getting called in. So yeah, all of this to say that even though we're looking at an event chart from long, long ago, we can think of this as a chart that has set something in motion, and that thing that has been set in motion keeps getting the transits. It impacts the transits still impact the thing today. Jupiter will only cross that Pluto in the spring, so that will be April, May, June. I think probably May, June. Jupiter will be on that natal Pluto. It'll be fleeting and it won't come back to that, but that will also be a trigger for this abdication chart, which reflects back on the royal family and the status of the royal family. Also, because in July, the very beginning of July, Jupiter will move into the sixth house here and oppose that Pluto. So that's again the thing that we're going to all experience. But in this case, it's the sixth house of obstacles and challenges and the 12th house of loss, that also relates back to ancestors. So I think it's a huge moment in time. Now, I also want to pull up, as I mentioned, I would talk about the new Prime Minister of Japan. And here we have the Japanese post-World War II constitution, which was imposed on it by, hang on a minute, I want the Libra new moon. There we go. It was imposed on it by the US, the so-called winners of the Second World War, and to humiliate Japan. And we see that humiliation here with the Saturn in Leo in the first house. And so this is part of the Japanese constitution. I use this chart because it does speak loudly to what goes on in Japan. And one of the things that's happened from that 21st of October, I'm just choosing the Libra new moon because I don't know when she was actually officially declared the prime minister. I couldn't find the exact time, but it would have been, this is London time, so we have to add, I think, 8 hours for Japan, or maybe it's even 9 hours from London. But anyway, so it's on the day of the Libra new moon. I'm just leaving it there. And it's certainly a new event. It's a new event. Venus is in really strong dignity, and she's there on Neptune. So it's almost like this visionary or this vision of the divine feminine, or this image of Japan in terms of the way that they communicate or share ideas is being boosted by this Venusian event, which is also a reflection of the new moon in the third house of communication. They already have a Libra moon, and that's also part of the energy of trying to find balance, trying to show up in a fair way. We have an ascendant in Leo for Japan, ruled by the sun in Taurus. Now, that is a challenging natal signature for people who have that. It's around finding identity. And again, if we think about this as the constitution that was imposed on Japan by the winning countries of the Second World War, they didn't make up this constitution. It was what was forced on them, and it was a pacifist constitution. So here we have the moon, for example, in opposition to Mars. Mars was very strong, but also with this oppositional quality to a moon that is trying to look for benefits or look for the better outcome. And that third house is again about contracts and obligations and duties and so on. And we see again the Neptune playing a role in that, in the sense that things are not entirely clear. This is not them creating this constitution. This is them agreeing that Hirohito had to sign the constitution on behalf of Japan as the defeated country that it was. Now, what we have here in terms of the natal or the event chart is that there's a significant issue here with the ruler of the chart in the 10th house, struggling to find its identity. The sun is in a square to Pluto. That's not the only reason. It's because the sun rules the ascendant in Leo. Anyone with this placement, with the sun, Taurus, 10th house, with an ascendant in Leo, is struggling with their identity, struggling with fathers who are absent, fathers who were maybe not able to do their job, or a sense of being abandoned by fathers. And again, if we look at this in terms of the constitution being imposed on Japan, then this would also be a part of that story. Now, we're seeing in terms of this prime minister, again, what was her name? Is Sanae, sorry to my Japanese viewers, Takaichi. So I hope I came close to that. She is changing things in a huge way in Japan. The Uranus on the North Node is telling us, even if we left everything out, the Uranus on the North Node is telling us that this is time for them to change. They are ready for this change. And this is part of this Uranian cycle that was also true of the Second World War. So here we have this recollection, let's say, of the energy that we're moving into, where Uranus was in the 10th house of this constitutional dynamic up to this point. If we take it as in theory that this would be the prior transit, but at this time we have a new start for Japan. It's a new, fresh start in terms of the image of Japan. So the last 7+ years, so from May of 2018, Japan has gone through an image change that has been immense. And one of those image changes is that, especially recently, Japan has agreed to relinquish its pacifist nature, its pacifist constitution, and this is quite literally what you could say is, by definition, what Uranus is doing as it crosses the North Node. It's saying our destiny is different now. Our vision of the future is different now. We're going in a new direction based on this. Now, in terms of Monday, the conjunction here at 20 degrees with Mars and Mercury was affecting the IC, and then, of course, by opposition, the midheaven of Japan. This is the change, the big change that is going to come back, and there will be something that will recall this event because this is in a square to the ascendant. Again, the image projected by Japan. So this Mercury retrograde will be part of a different way of seeing Japan. So hold on to your hats because Japan will no doubt show up in the news for anyone paying attention, where especially because the Mercury retrograde will pass over the South Node 3 times as it goes through this phase. And that's something to watch, to pay attention to, because we will see the results of that very, very clear, starkly, when Uranus moves over the North Node of Japan, and that will be in May of 2026. So May and June of 2026, we will see the result, or the coming forward, what has been presented here. All right, sorry about that. That was Correos, who was delivering a package. It all happens once I start recording things. So where was I here? So what I was going to point out is the Grand Water Trine, which is extremely powerfully influencing the Jupiter of the Japanese constitution. And it's going to pull in all of those water houses, similar, in fact, to Andrew's chart, but a very different theme in this case. And it's going to trigger the Jupiter of the Japanese chart. And this is in the 4th house of the land, or the identification with lineage, the identification with its past, I guess. And this is what's being transformed in this very, very significant period of time, in a very, very big way, because Neptune and then Saturn will be in the 9th house again from February. So Neptune from 26th of January, and then from the 14th of February, Saturn goes in, and on the 20th, they conjoin in the 9th house with a sense of a renewed purpose, which has been part of the signature of the last 4 or 5 months or so, which is again recharging this idea of what Japan represents. So we have a new beginning in this sense. And one of the things that the woman prime minister has said she is keen to do is to move to definitely to the right compared to where Japan has been up until now, and move towards a more militarized Japan, and no longer even pretending to be a pacifist country. Now, what's going to happen is in the early part of 2026, I keep trying to say spring, but I know many of you are not in the Northern Hemisphere, so I try and avoid the seasonal reference, but it's difficult from a habit point of view. So let's look at March, April, May, and June of 2026. That will be a very powerful indicator of the new purpose and change, with Saturn going to be trining Saturn, trining the South Node, sextiling the North Node, and then as of May, Uranus comes back to the North Node, and the Neptune will even hold a longer trine to Saturn because it moves much more slowly. So this is a significant change, a change of dynamic, a change of direction, change of identity for Japan, and especially as Uranus goes backwards into the 10th house between the 7th of November until the 26th of April next year, that you can look for that to provoke the sort of final touches on the transaction that has been that has been so transformative for Japan. It's the very first time in history Japan has a female ruler, well, in the form of a prime minister. And there we are. So that's Japan. Now, let's have a quick look at the Louvre. This is taking much longer than I had expected, but once I get started on astrology, I really can't stop myself. Now, the Louvre, didn't they have a bad old day on Sunday? This is the date of the theft. It was at 9:30 in the morning. It was completed by 9:37 in the morning, so pretty much smash and grab. And at that time, what we find, so 9:30 in Paris, of course, Paris, France, where the Louvre is now. It's worth noting in the natal chart of the Louvre that part of its signature is it was a royal palace that was converted during the Revolution to a museum. So when the people saw all of the magnificence and the spoils, the wealth of the royal family, which it had been home to. It had been actually the residence of many royals for centuries up until that point, gradually expanding one wing at a time. There's a bunch of different iterations of the Louvre. For anyone who's been there, you see that it changes character in different places quite a lot. Anyway, so the Louvre was actually converted into a museum as a signature of the revolution, and saying now this belongs to the people. What had been royal possessions belongs now to the people. And then, of course, over time, the Louvre also started to accumulate many things from French colonies and from other places in the world, sometimes through purchases, sometimes through theft, sometimes through donations. And so what was stolen, and this is very symbolic given the origins of the Louvre, it was the Napoleonic sort of royal jewels. So the very significant of the actual royalty who were kicked out of the Louvre during the Revolution to be replaced by the revolutionary government and a museum instead. And so that's a very interesting dynamic in the signature of this moment, because it changes it's a reputational damage that is going on here. And this is, so it's not just a theft, this is a reputational damage that the Louvre is impacted by. Neptune is in exact opposition to the moon, not exact, but within a degree and a half, or almost 2 degrees. So actually it's quite strongly opposed, but not as tight as I thought. My math isn't that great. So Neptune is hovering around the descendant in opposition to the ascendant for the next year and a half, where it will be also with Saturn in the early part of 2026, and again, something that will oppose the ascendant. But it also is in a square to Venus on the midheaven, which is, of course, a lovely signature to have as the ruler of the first house, ruler of the ascendant with the midheaven. This is all about art. It's all about beauty. What a beautiful signature for a museum to have. And Neptune, of course, in the first house, so even more so. And it also even signifies the change of rulership is throw the king out, a Leo sun, because of course it has a Leo sun, and with Uranus, and that's the revolutionary quality, quite literally, of how this museum is manifesting out in the world. Now, this is really, really interesting, because I find that symbolically it's going to show quite a lot of the weaknesses, not just of the Louvre, which obviously has shown quite a lot of structural weaknesses in terms of its own security, but also a lot of the fragilities around the French nation as it stands today, and the recollection of the energy, the revolutionary energy that this moment also reminds us of. And so this is quite significant. The other significant thing that happened on that specific day, as the Louvre was being broken into on a Sunday morning, broad daylight on a sunny day. These guys rock up with a lift truck, so the kind of thing you would bring to move house or something, and they just parked it outside, took the lift up, bashed in the window, and then grabbed what they could, and out the door they went in 7 minutes. Now look at the tight opposition here, within 4 arc minutes of the Saturn retrograde in opposition to the moon, of again the identity of the Louvre, part of which is a little bit mysterious or a little bit hidden. And again, if we take the 12th house significator, it's a lineage. It's about what has come before, things that have come before. The fourth, eighth, and 12th are very connected to the lineage. Mercury is there in its own sign and also in its sign of um, uh, um, exaltation. And it's also with the North Node. So it's a lot about accumulating. Accumulating for the people is one way of looking at that, or accumulating in a sense that is a little bit potentially nefarious. And again, that calls in this whole sense of who owns what, the possessions that are extremely important, that we see in the Jupiter in the second house there. That's all ruled by a Mars that's in Cancer, which again is a representation of the tension of the people at this revolutionary time, which is overthrowing the royalty, the king of the day, and creating a museum instead. So this is whole the whole thing is built on this tension, the Mars and Cancer, the family disputes, as it were. And that's in a square, pardon me, in a trine to this Jupiter. So here again, what can be a favorable opportunity or something that's quite dynamic. The Mars is actually in a very interesting dynamic with Jupiter. It is the ruler of Jupiter, and Jupiter is the exaltation ruler of Mars. So that pulls them together in a quite favorable way. But it's still a Jupiter in Scorpio, which means that there's something a little bit off with what's going on here. And it's also in a square to Pluto, which is in conjunct this Mars. So again, we see that there's a lot of signatures here of the issue, of course, which was the bigger social issue of the day, but that reflects on the Louvre in terms of ownership and property and who gets to hold what. Now we have exactly those placements involved in this grand water trine, and that will be significant because the story of this, remember, sixth house is all the obstacles and difficulties and things that we have to overcome. It's what we lose from our relationships. It's what the trouble that relationships require to get involved in. And here we have this Saturn in opposition to the moon, in approaching a trine with the Mars, approaching a trine, but it won't perfect in either case with the Jupiter, and also with the North Node, which will later on we'll see in 2026 will actually be in the nodal reversal. So they'll be in their reversal situation compared to, say, 2018, when they would have had their nodal return. So the Saturn in the sixth house of difficulties and challenges is definitely going to be a headache for the Louvre, but it will be part of what is resolved between now and February in terms of the Saturn cycle. And this grand water trine will be part of resolving that. The South Node is in House of Loss. So it almost looks like this is not just a loss materially, but this is a reputational loss that is really quite significant for the Louvre. And Mercury going back and forth between the second house of possessions and values and what it has, the stuff it has, going to repeat this conjunction with Mars again and again as they go back and forth, or at least Mercury going back and forth between the third and the second house, third house being communications and information, and the contracts and so on. The Mercury stationing is going to be stationing in a square to the nodal axis. So this reverse nodal return that we get in 2026 will already get a glimpse of what that's going to represent, because Mercury rules that North Node when Mercury stations at almost 7 degrees of Sagittarius. And I think that's when we're going to find out what is the consequence, or who stole the gems, or they can't sell these things. This is the kind of crazy drama around this. I mean, it does, with Venus having just crossed the ascendant and it is square to the midheaven where we already have a natal Venus. There is a certain amount of dignity here for the Louvre in terms of their reputation. There's definitely a loss of reputation, but there's also a certain amount of favor. Let's say things can work out in their favor, but it's definitely it's bringing up a lot of questions, where in the course of this bigger trine, the mini grand trine, which incorporates Pluto in the fifth house of self-expression and how they will reach out into their image or the way that people see them particularly, is in this trine with Uranus in the ninth house of what is the purpose of this institution. That also has to do with the legislation, it has to do with government, it has to do with institutions in general. And this will be a moment that is significant in terms of changing the dynamic of the Louvre and what is this institution for? Because part of the original story is who owns what and how did it get there? And as the South Node is moving through here, I think part of this moment in time is going to incite an enormous amount of communication and discussion with people around the notion of these colonial era museums and what they contain, what they possess. So notice that the theft happened when the midheaven at that moment was on the sun, had just crossed the sun, the Louvre image to the public. So very, very significant. It's got that revolutionary, opposition with Uranus and Pluto. It's a signature that's baked in, and that is part of this thing that's going to be changing. And again, this is how you see with the grand water trine is going to be triggering these planets, which are also squaring. So Jupiter is squared the Uranus-Pluto opposition. So there's something here that's going to change the function of the Louvre, that's going to be changing certainly the image that's already changed, and also perhaps changing literally the contents of the Louvre and how that is managed. Because we have this Mars Mercury implied in the second house of possessions and what's there. So I think the Mercury retrograde will help them find out who done it and maybe even retrieve the possessions. Mercury was still not in the shadow at this time, so this is a pre-shadow Mercury, which means that there is an outside chance that this will happen. But if it were in the shadow, I would say it's definitely going to happen. All right, so that's the Louvre, and I just wanted to pull that in there because it's quite a significant cultural moment, and it's, I think, an interesting reflection on the situation in France in general, which is a complete mess. And I think Macron's government is possibly the most hated, most despised of all European governments, which are by and large all despised. And again, part of the reason people despise Macron is because of his indolence and his entitlement and his arrogance. And that was also the reason for overthrowing the monarchy in the French Revolution and then turning the Louvre into a museum instead for the people. Well, there we are. Okay, so I'm just going to come to the current moment, and we're going to ignore this one there. So we're coming to the current moment, and I'm just going to go sign by sign. This is not going to be an accurate reflection of the exact placements of Mercury, but just to say where Mercury is moving through your chart between Scorpio and Sagittarius, and then we can have a quick look through the dial for all of you. This is definitely one of the longer videos that I'm doing here. So we just have to put Aries on the ascendant. Let's try and move that forward. There we go. So Aries is on the ascendant. And let me just take away here before we get too cluttered. I'm going to take away the usual suspects. We don't need the ascendant, descendant, midheaven, or IC. All right, so Aries, I've already spoken recently about much of this grand trine dynamic, so I'm not going to go back there. I just want to point out the Mercury retrograde cycle. So there's a lot for Aries happening in the eighth house, which represents everything to do with secrets and what is maybe even in a psychological or emotional place of intimacy. And that can actually be physical intimacy as well. So there may be something here to do with a committed relationship, a dynamic committed relationship that's ongoing, or one that you're starting, or there's something to do with a marriage or a marriage partner that is coming to a point of intensity. It doesn't look terribly bad. It just means that there seems to be something that is in the process of renegotiation. especially because Venus is in your house of the relationship itself. So there does seem to be a certain favorability here, and Mars, your ruler, is very strong in the eighth house for you in Scorpio. So there is something that can support you there, but it requires a certain active participation, perhaps in terms of conversation or concessions around whatever is going on in the dynamic of relationships. If this is about money that you are receiving, there might be a deeper negotiation that is required if this is something to do with an inheritance or something. Often with Mars in the eighth house, there can be challenges around that. That can be about siblings and disputes within the family, like cousins, siblings, aunts, uncles, etc., contending, let's say, for a share of the winnings. If this is about an income, and that doesn't mean you will necessarily lose that. I would have to see your natal chart around that, but it means that there's going to be a need to recalibrate or to deal with something that might feel a bit contested. Um, and then, of course, because the Mercury is stationing and then moving backwards, there's going to be this dynamic between the ninth house of where you think you're going with whatever this is. Mercury is going to take you through the eighth house, go through the difficulties, through the perhaps also transformations through crisis and awareness. That might be psychological, or it might be financial. It might be, again, about the resources that need to be um, dealt with another person, or the intimacy, etc. But Mercury going into the ninth house then starts to get a vision, a higher sense of what this is all about, and get some meaning behind it, maybe a different vision or a different philosophy behind what all that might represent for you. And that Mercury is trinal to you once it moves into the ninth house. Again, it becomes a little bit more favorable, if perhaps a little ideological or overly optimistic. That would be one dynamic. And if it is overly optimistic, then Mercury will be moving back anyway into your eighth house. Do listen to the introduction for all of the dates around that. And then when it moves back into the eighth house, then you're going to resolve whatever this difficulty was that began around the time of the new moon in October, the 21st of October. So this dynamic of Mercury retrograding is a longer arc of a story that goes really right into December, where you'll find the resolution coming through December and not before. So whatever this is, it's something that you can work with. There's an energy that is favorable in terms of, because it's your ruler, in terms of fighting your corner and taking a stand, but it may be something that has to change the dynamic in relationship. If this is a love relationship, it would definitely be something that is generating a lot of passion or a lot of activity, a lot of discussion around intimacy or around what you share together. And again, it can be on a very neutral level. It can be your participation or interest in things to do with the occult, things to do with what is motivating you behind the scenes. All those different practices that come from a mystery school, even including psychological stuff, psychiatry, psychology, and so on. So a great opportunity for you to learn more, both about yourself and through yourself. And as that's part of the bigger arc of transformation for you, um, with the North Node in the 12th house, you are already looking quite deeply into more unconscious things, or the more spiritual side of your life, especially as Neptune and Saturn are back in there together again. All right, I'm going to keep it short. There's a lot of other information in the introduction, so make sure you watch for that, and I'll see you in the next video. For Taurus, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant sign, all of this activity starts in your seventh house of relationships and the party across the table from you. Your ruler Venus is in the sixth house, suggesting that there's a bit of work that you're dealing with, that you're having to take care of. It seems to work out in your favor with your ruler in good dignity in the sixth house. And if this is something to do with a discussion that's necessary with a colleague or a life partner, business partner, an important other person, this can also work out in your favor, but possibly through a bit of wrangling, a bit of negotiation. It might have something to do with where you need to draw boundaries, where those boundaries are not necessarily based in not trusting. That's one of the challenges with the Taurus and Scorpio axis, is issues of trust. issues of fear and trust and lack. And so if this is a trust issue, that would be something worth exploring as well. Um, since Uranus is in your second house and about to go back into your first house, this can be part of a bigger arc of where you relate to your own worthiness or your own value or valuables in a different way. And this is maybe part of the bigger change that you're finishing up over the next few months when Uranus moves back into your first house. Remember that Mercury will be in opposition to this Uranus as it goes back into your first house. So it'll be opposing Uranus 3 times as it moves through this over the course of October, November. So there's a big shift in terms of the way that you integrate relationships and so on. And then Mercury goes into your 8th house of what you share with another. That also reflects your psychological nature or your capacity to grapple with crises or things that need to be dealt with. It's change through crisis, the 8th house. It's how you transform through something that is going on in your personal life. And again, I'd have to see your natal chart to see how you're going through all of this because there's a lot of generational differences as well with that reference. But anyway, in general, for Taurus, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, there's loads of change that you're still going on, that is still going on, and this Mercury retrograde cycle is picking up on that in a really strong way. So this is the better part of the rest of the year, finishing up the journey of the 8th house only well into December by the time it is done with this change that's beginning in the nature of relationships for you. So listen again to the introduction when you get all the dates to come around this period in time. So lots of transformation that is personal, but will be like the mirror of relationship will be part of how you gauge all of that. And by that time, also your ruler will be along with the Mercury coming back into Scorpio. So that will be another part of the dynamic there where your ruler is starting to maybe mollify what may have felt like tension at this point or a need for clarity. We'll call it that, need for clarity. We've got Sun, Moon, Mercury, Mars, and Black Moon Lilith in the 7th house. So there's a lot to talk about in relationship for you, Taurus. And this might be coming at you from a partner. It may be that you sit there thinking everything's fine and your partner comes at you with all of this stuff. So either way, you're going to have to grapple with it and to use this as an opportunity for change. And the way through that, of course, is communication. Mercury representing talking about it, sitting down, communicating in a way that is to benefit both of you. All right. And this might have something to do with values or money, again, because of that Uranus, but also because of the Mercury going into the 8th. So this might also be part of that. Is it about intimacy? Is it about trust? Is it about money and the trust around money? All right, I'm going to leave it at that. Otherwise, we'll just carry on I'll just be blabbing away. Without seeing your chart, I can't really be that precise. Okay, Taurus, good luck with that. I'll see you in the next video. And Gemini, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, you're going to have this movement of Mercury between your 6th house of everyday work and challenges that you have to overcome and things that you're grappling with in terms of your day-to-day schedule, perhaps even health. And it goes back and forth into the house of relationship, and that will maybe have an impact on your business partnerships or your life partner or the way that you relate to relationship in general. Certainly, it looks like there's a lot of change in terms of your sense of the way you show up because of that Uranus going through your 1st house, which will be in opposition to this Mercury 3 times. So Mercury will first transition into your 7th house, oppose Uranus while it's still in your 1st house, and then Mercury is going to be moving back into your 6th house and oppose the Uranus that is at the end of the 12th house for you. And so there's a lot of shifting around your sense of obligation and duty, your sense of your everyday experience, the work that you do, maybe feelings of obligation again via the work or issues that might impinge on your health, for example. That's not necessarily because there is specifically a health issue. It would just be for those of you who are dealing with something like that. Again, I would have to see your natal chart to see how that's all represented or panning out. But Mars is very strong in the sixth house. It helps you overcome whatever that is. It can bring up issues, especially around inflammation, and especially if this has something to do with anger, resentment, anger, a resonance of something that feels like disgruntlement. If that's the case, then be careful of that because it can create inflammation in the body. It'll create inflammation that you'll need to grapple with. You'll need to deal with, and especially for you, that can be issues around the lungs, the arthritis, things to do with movement that affect articulations, difficulties around the joints. Do we say articulations? I think that's franglais, but anyway. So you get the point. So Mercury is moving from the sixth into the seventh, then it becomes a bit of a tete-a-tete. Then you have this conversational dynamic where it's like, I need to talk about this. I need to communicate with somebody about this. And that's your ruler, Mercury. So it's important whenever Mercury is in these cycles of retrograde, you want to keep tracking them because it kind of shows you where you are, where your interest is, what's going on in your life. And as it goes in the seventh house, we see quite a lot of a very strong dynamic around this issue of relating and dialoguing with someone. So there's something maybe about a business venture and how that might affect your work. Venus is in your fifth house of romance and love and children, but also that's an entrepreneurial house. And that's one potential is that this is part of an obligation around work, but it's something that you're excited about. You're something you're generating with that North Node up in the 10th house. So do take care of your well-being, your health, your relational dynamics, especially if there's something upsetting or challenging around a colleague at work, or an employee, even someone who works for you domestically. This can be part of that dynamic. Right. And again, it's about obligation. And, is there a dynamic here where I feel pressed to do something that I'm not really interested in doing? Well, that's a question to answer with the Mercury retrograde. If I feel I'm taking on too much of a burden, it's too much for me, I need to answer that question for myself and move beyond the victim martyr dynamic. All right. So good luck with that, Gemini, and I will see you in the next video. Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, this dynamic of Mercury going back and forth between your fifth house and sixth house is going to call in creative impulses or dynamic impulses of how you want to show up, how you want to express yourself. Mercury is all about of course, communication. It rules your communication house. And it's also very much to do with creative project that can have to do with business and commerce and so on. So whatever you're organizing now, whatever you're organizing in terms of whether it be teaching, which is very highlighted for Cancers, teaching or learning, or if it's some new aspect of business and restructuring, then this is part of this dynamic of Mercury. I have a Cancer moon and ascendant, and I am still in the process of restructuring my business and creating a new one. And so I'm just crossing the T's and dotting the I's on that this week. And I'm sure that something will also have to come back at me because this is all happening in the Mercury shadow phase. I can almost guarantee that I'm still going to be dealing with this in December somehow. But anyway, it's about the incitement to create. It's about inspiration. The first, fifth, and ninth house are the houses of dharma, meaning your vision, your purpose, your sense of what your meaning and purpose are. And that Mercury going into the sixth house will then bring that into a practical place in what do I have to do about this now? How do I communicate this? How do I express what I need to do about this? There may be a health element. The sixth house is about health, and that would only apply if that's something that's already there for you. Jupiter is in the first house and in exaltation for Cancer, Sun, Moon, and Rising. So as Jupiter rules your sixth house, it's actually like a safeguard. It's something that can be very protective. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. But just in case, this will be maybe giving you results or giving you a diagnosis or giving you something that you can work with because it's the Mercury going into the sixth. Mercury in the sixth house also can represent how you communicate at work or around what you do. So it might be a good time to message or get, what is the message I need to get across? Remember that Mercury and Mars will meet again in the sixth house when they come together in November, because Mercury will be stationing as Mars moves directly through your sixth house. Mercury will be backing into Mars again. So they will be meeting each other over the next couple of months, in each subsequent month as Mercury keeps going through its retrograde motion. And so this is it's a dynamic cycle where you're really focused on your work, on your business, on your creativity, maybe also around children. And this might be because Mercury does represent children. And there may be something about children that they're grappling with something, and maybe this is more about their story, and you're the support, you're helping them with this story. That may or may not include health issues. Again, I would only be able to say that with any certainty if I look at your chart. Um, but this is definitely part of a bigger growth cycle for you, as the first, fifth, and ninth houses are really expansion. It's about expansion and personal growth, more so because Jupiter is in your first house, and that's a very rare opportunity for really major expansion of purpose and meaning and creative self-expression. And that's where Mars can really help you. If this is about a relationship, because the fifth house is romance and love as well. And if this is about a relationship, this would be an incredibly dynamic and passionate relationship. You have a lot going on there in the fifth house, but then that energy moves to the sixth house, where if this is a new project, a new relationship, especially as it's squared Pluto, in your eighth house, then there would have to be some renegotiation or some bugs to be worked out in terms of the challenges that may come from that when Mercury and then later Mars goes into your sixth house. And that's part of the Mercury retrograde cycle. Sixth house can become issues that need to be grappled with around relational dynamics. So sixth is the 12th house from the seventh. So it's like whatever is taking away from the relationship. Like you got to stay home and, I don't know, clean the house, and you can't go out for dinner. Stuff like it doesn't have to be major stuff, but just to say the passion is here, and then somebody has to do the laundry the next day, okay, when Mercury goes in the sixth house. So that's that. I will see you in another video. I look forward to that. Bye bye. Leo, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. This is happening in your fourth house, which is a quadrant house, a square to you, and so extremely powerful, as your Sun, the ruler, or rather your ruler, the Sun, is also there at the same time with Mercury, Mars, and then this is where Mercury is already in its shadow phase. So something about this moment is going to come back and be repeated. Listen to the introduction to hear a little bit more about that. But as your ruler is there, this is a significant moment. I should have mentioned that for Cancer as well, because the Cancer moon ruler is in the fifth house for Cancer. But here, what we have is a very strong ruler, Mars. Your ruler is with Mars that is ruling your fourth house. So there's a lot going on, maybe beneath the surface for you in terms of your unconscious or your psychological or your emotional foundations, in terms of what you're grappling with through family stuff, family lineage issues, issues to do with your father or your mother, for that matter, for your parents and lineage in general. Um, and When Mercury moves from the fourth, it's going to also perhaps call in some issues around property, purchase of property. And maybe that's part of the decision process that you're in with Venus in the third house. So again, if it's about moving or property or something like that, this will be a process that takes you a while between now and the end of December, because Mercury is going back and forth between their fourth and fifth house, where there's going to have to be some new creative element that's part of this story. Maybe it's kind of like with the fourth house, a lot of that in terms of an internal dialogue is, what do I need to feel secure? What do I need to feel happy? In a either an energetic way or a physical way, in a literal physical way. or psychological way. And then the fifth house is how we express that. So with Mercury going into the fifth, it's maybe realizing, okay, you know what, I need this, and now I know how to reach out into it and express that. And that can be love, and it can be a realization around the deeper emotions that you have for someone or project at this time, because that's also where we find the North Node in the eighth house of intimacy, where Neptune and Saturn are going back in and closing out that phase that you've been in for many years already. Jupiter is in your 12th, ruling that fifth when Mercury goes in there. So there can be something again that comes through something deep inside of you that you're trying to create from. If you are a creative type, this is very, very interesting dynamic. You can really use deep, like dreams and deep information that comes from a non-linear intelligence. It comes from a place that is much more gut or heart-centered, primal stuff, and that's a great place to create from if that's part of your project. And if this is to do with a like a work project, again, there may be some reason for you to have to reorient yourself in terms of work. Is this something to do with a business partner where you don't feel it is working for you, or you need to restructure how this works for you so that you can feel more secure in the dynamic? Pluto in the seventh. And of course, if this is about a marriage or some kind of marriage type relationship, a deep commitment, there is something that you're restructuring around this. And then the Mercury cycle going into the fifth house can express your emotional needs, let's say, or the needs of the moment. Hard to say. I would need to see your chart to know exactly how this is going to manifest, but definitely dig deep for this. You know, for Leo, it's a really profound opportunity to learn about yourself, go deep, and really see that there's ways that you are needing to express yourself that maybe up until this point you've not really been able to. You feel maybe a bit blocked in that. So that's also what I mentioned that in the previous video around the grand water trine. That'll keep coming back, so don't worry. If you need to know more about that, just keep following. See you in the next video. So Virgo, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, this is happening in your third house, and that third house is about communication, and it's also with reference to siblings and people that are in your extended family, and like cousins and so on. And this is also your local space, your community, the people you see every day, the places that you go to on your bike or that you walk around, and it's around practical, pragmatic education. So Mercury rules your sign, and that's where you have the South Node as well. So there's part of a bigger picture of big change going on for you. And with Mercury in the third house, you also with the Mars there, you may have a realization around something that you want to express literally in terms of speaking about something, or express in a bigger way, like through a sense of career or a higher vision of purpose for yourself. You've got Jupiter in the 11th, and that's ruling the seventh house, where you have a lot of dynamics around relational dynamics with other people, but also thinking in terms of an audience. How do I communicate out into the world with people individually or collectively? And maybe you're planning to teach, or maybe you're planning to communicate something artistic. The Venus in the second and all of that energy in the third house is fantastic creative energy. So really great for artists, really great for poets and for writers. If that's something that is motivating you right now, this would be a great opportunity. So Venus, Mercury, your ruler, is going to be moving back and forth between the third and fourth house. And as it does that, it will oppose Uranus in your 10th house 3 times. And as it's doing that opposition, you're going to get great insights. And those insights will come through this creative impulse, or this need to learn, or a need to teach, or a need to reconnect with extended family or siblings or your local space, your neighborhood. A need to choose, because third house is also choice and using your willpower. So this can be part of that. How am I choosing something? How am I grappling with the new thing that is coming and making this decision? And so with Mercury in opposition to Uranus at this time, as it keeps giving you new insights, it can also relate to your marital status or your work status or your ambitions overall. And then when Uranus goes back in your ninth house, with Mercury coming back into the third house during the retrograde cycle, which moves it more towards the November. So that's in November from the 29th of October. So that is going to be an opportunity for you to realize this, how do I express my higher purpose? And this is something you've been developing already over these many years that Uranus has been in Taurus in your ninth house, trinal to you. So it's quite a significant journey with this opportunity with your ruler going retrograde. Always pay attention to the retrograde cycle of Mercury, because for you it's quite relevant. It's your ruler, and there's something that you can use very consciously to your advantage, even though it's a retrograde cycle, which sometimes can make things feel like they're being delayed, slowed down, but it's definitely something you can use to your advantage. Keep in mind with the South Node in your first house that you're shedding a lot of who you thought you were. You're shedding a lot of your identity. You're shedding a lot of the ways that you used to show up. And maybe this is part of teaching you how to show up in a new way, how to communicate in a new way. And equally with whom to communicate. Who should I be talking to? Who is a waste of time? That's part of the bigger dynamic of the Saturn North Node in the 7th, and now with Neptune again since the 22nd. All right, so I'd need to see your chart to say more about that. So good luck with all of this, and I'll see you in the next video. So Libra, you're very fortunate to have your ruler in the first house, and all of this Scorpio stuff is going on in your second house, which will have something to do with your own self-worth, which may be getting a boost, or your notion around money and what's available to you. What possessions do you have? What are the resources available to you at this particular time? It looks like you have loads of resources. It looks like you've got a lot going there. That's, or at the very least, it looks like you're having to manage your resources or manage a lot of money issues or issues that have to do with support or who supports whom. So the second house is also family. So if you have things going on in terms of family, this will be a really strong dynamic um, that can have you either needing support and calling on family for support, or being somebody that the family is leaning on for support. Either way, you feel like you've got all the resources. There's a lot of attention placed on your values and what is important to you, and also your own sense of self-worth. So a very, very big movement of the dynamic between, if my value is this, then how do I express that? And that's where Mercury goes out into the third house for you, and you are able to communicate based on these values. And if this is about family stuff, then there's something that you grapple with around your extended family when Mercury goes into the third house, maybe dealing with siblings, dealing with issues of connection or disconnection potentially in the extended family. Jupiter is ruling your third house from the 10th. So there's something here that's very potent if this is about a career. And Jupiter rules your sixth as well. And your exaltation ruler, Saturn, is also in the sixth. So that brings you a lot of good fortune if you're talking or thinking about expanding in your career, or it's like, I'm good enough to do this. This is where I want to be now. This is part of a longer arc. And if you've been watching my videos up until now, you've known that this is part of you growing into a much more confident, self-expressed version of yourself. And this Mercury going into the third house is going to help with that. November and December will be an opportunity for you to recalibrate your connection to your worth and your values, and then express that, negotiate based on that. If third house can also represent contracts and things that you negotiate. All right, Libra, make the most of it, and good luck, and I'll see you in the next video. And Scorpio, so much of this energy is about you. I'm actually going to pull this back a day just so that we can bring that moon back in to have it with you. So this is happening with your ruler, Mars, in your first house, which is already always optimal. This is always really dynamic for Scorpio rising. Having the ruler in the first house just has you full of beans, loads of projects and ideas. But with the Mercury there may be some issue that you're grappling with that you need to work on in terms of standing up for yourself or expressing your needs. Maybe you're really ready now to share what you know in a creative way in terms of a work project or a dynamic, way of teaching or learning something. And this is also a really great time to start something like that. If this is a vision that you have, you can work through the retrograde cycle to pull in the missing pieces in terms of what is important, what is valuable, how can I make money from this? If I want to bring myself through this, how do I do that? This could be a really great dynamic between the first and the second house. Um, if this is about a relational situation, which most likely it is going to involve, that can be a business partner or a life partner. But that doesn't necessarily mean things are difficult. Venus, which rules your seventh house of relationships, is currently in the 12th house, but will also then move into your first house of self during this cycle of Mercury moving back and forth between your second and your first house. So there can be something that is really productive around what you desire in relationship and being seen, showing up in a way that allows you to feel like you are valued or that you understand clearly who you are, and this is how you're going to manifest yourself. Beware of steamrolling your way through a relationship, or beware of steamrolling your way even in terms of a business situation. The sun rules your 10th house of career, and it's there in your first house, really strong. It is every year at this time, but it's just an interesting feature around the time that Mercury is in its shadow, entering the shadow for this retrograde cycle. So there's something here because Mars is not only your ruler, but it rules your sixth house. So beware of any challenges with work colleagues or things that have to do with your day-to-day schedule and things that you're doing. Don't overdo it because the Mercury here, the Mercury Mars rather, can have you pushing yourself, mentally stressing, mentally pushing yourself, mentally struggling to, get a project done by a particular deadline or something like that. So be careful of that. That will be challenging for you. Mercury will be opposing Uranus, first in your eighth house, where Uranus is going into that place of understanding your inner psychological workings, but also secrets and things that have come through the family, things that you've inherited, patterns that you inherit, as well as money you inherit, money that you get through other people, including clients. And so this, because Mercury is going back and forth between your first and second, and it will be in opposition between the Uranus going back and forth between the house of the other and what you share with the other, there can be quite a bit of negotiating around what you feel is your value or your share, what you deserve. And again, that might be something that it's a helpful thing for you to stand up to, or it can be something that maybe you're coming in so strong that you can actually disrupt the relationship itself. So, using your higher wisdom, you've got Jupiter trinal to you, which is extremely favorable. These are Dharma houses. All of the water signs are in this Dharma trine. And dharma is the sense of why am I here? What is the right action to take in this moment? And what is my purpose? And how does that take me towards my purpose? And Jupiter is really, really in the optimal place for you to realize that sense of I've got a better vision for my life. And maybe this will be like, okay, so if I have a better vision for my life, this is how I need to show up then. And this will be between your sense of self-worth or values and what you're worth in terms of even finances and money and who's sharing that with you and how you deal with people. This will be a great opportunity to then have that work in your favor in terms of why you do what you do, in terms of the granular actions, but also in terms of your life. So a very powerful time to kind of reinvent yourself, actually, which is a really favored thing, especially as the North Node is in the fifth and Saturn and Neptune come back in the fifth, also trinal to you. And so you're very much personally involved in this groundwater trine of this season. And you're readjusting how you show up in the world using your creative expression. All right, I'd need to see your chart to see more about that, but certainly this is an exciting time for you to really step into yourself and to work on the way that you want to change in a longer vision, a longer arc, and at the very least over the next 2 months. All right, good luck with that. I'll see you in the next video. Oops, we're only going, wait, we don't want to do that. 1, 2, 3. I want to go by hours, so we just get the ascendant changing. Here we go. Sagittarius, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant. So you have this all happening in your 12th house, which represents faraway lands or people at a distance. It also represents things that we can't see. So 12th house is either behind closed doors, or it's in confinement, or it's somewhere that's shut away, locked away, or it's behind closed eyes, and it's the unconscious, and it's our imaginal frame of reference. And it can even be with reference to ancestors and people who are what we could describe as spirit guides. So a really interesting dynamic for Sagittarius, because you've got so much activity in the 4th, 8th, and 12th houses, which are moksha houses, the houses of liberation and awakening, letting go, let's say, of material stuff. Doesn't mean you have to become poor, but it just means that there's a letting go, a shedding of these things that can be supported at this time, that frees you up. So don't think of it in terms of letting go and be walking in poverty, but it means letting go of attachment to what is out there, attachment to Maya, attachment to life, substances, and freeing yourself up. So this Mercury retrograde is calling in awareness that can be spiritual or guided from these unconscious or even dreamlike states of mind, or from, again, people who are far away, or people in consultation, in a clinic, in a retreat setting, as a medical setting, or in a confinement setting of some kind. And then it pulls that into your house of self, your first house, and as you express that, you are able then to express something of yourself. And as it's going through this process, Mercury goes into your first house up to 7 degrees. So if you have 7 to, let's say, up to 9 degrees of Sagittarius, this will affect you very, very powerfully, whether that's Sun, Moon, or Ascendant. And then for the rest of the journey, Mars is also going to move into your first house. And so as those two keep moving back and forth, you're changing based on things that you're realizing, but it's happening deep inside, or it's happening behind the scenes, or you're working with a counselor, or you're working with a therapist, or something along those lines, that you're working on yourself to get where you want to go here. A lot of this can have to do with lineage, with the family patterns or the family that you come from, or your deeper sense of yourself, just having a deeper awareness of self. And all of that is really auspicious right now, really, really good for you to be working on while this retrograde affects you personally. And of course, as Mercury goes back and forth between your 12th and your first house of self, 12th house of what is hidden or secret or away, you will have this opposition with Uranus that is newly in your house of relationship, and then it's going back into your 6th house of your day-to-day obligations or your work or challenges to overcome. And so there's going to be this dynamic of questioning this relational dynamic that might be quite new, or a new way of showing up in relationship, but it's based on information you're gleaning through this retrograde, through deeper work that you're doing on yourself, or realizations that you're having either spontaneously or spiritually, or through the psychological assessment of what's going on. Mercury rules that house of relationship, and so it can also be that there's some issue with a foreigner, that you're connected to someone coming from abroad, for example, that you've fallen in love with, or that there's a new relationship starting with. And the Mercury retrograding back and forth between your first and your 12th house can shed some light on whether that has longevity. If it's something durable, this Mercury retrograde cycle will help to express that, help to answer that question. All right, so good luck with that, Sagittarius. I'll see you in the next video. Capricorn, for Sun, Moon, and Rising in Capricorn, you have now your exaltation ruler Mars in the 11th house. So there's a lot of focus on gains, what you can earn from your career, or the results of your ambition, for example, or the results of your sense of how you participate in society or in a group or association with people. There's a lot of activity around that, around your social life in general, because we've got the third, seventh, and 11th house. It's really, really strong. Loads of communications and activities that might have to do with business partnerships. And there's a strong indication that there can be some real gains from these negotiations. Got Venus super prominent at the top of your house in the career aspect of the chart. This could involve a marriage situation, in which case, again, there can be some real advantageous discussions or results coming from your spouse or from the dynamic of relationship. That is also really favorable for communication in general. If you are deciding now it's time to write or speak or teach or create something, a podcast or some new platform, this is a great time to do that. It will be something that comes with a lot of energy behind it. You would have a lot of connection with the people that you're expressing to, but you would have to be ready for pushback and also be aware of how you might be pushing buttons with the Mars Mercury coming together. There will be an assertiveness and a drive that may feel overwhelming to some people. So just keep that in mind. The Mercury retrograde will go into your 12th, which can represent foreign lands or people who are coming from abroad, especially as Mercury is also the ruler of your 9th house. Or connection with foreign lands. It can come through like work. People that you work with are from abroad. Jupiter in the house of the business partner or relationship partner is ruling the 12th. It also rules the 3rd house of communications and connections with people. The 11th house also represents elder siblings. There may be something, because you've got North Node in the 3rd house and the Jupiter in the 7th, again, the relational dynamic is really, really strong. So there can be something going on in the life of an elder sibling, or that is caused by an elder sibling that you're having to focus a lot of attention on, or it can represent an uncle, especially a paternal uncle. But just keep in mind that sometimes these things happen and they're not directly about us, but there are people who are interacting with us and that we have to grapple with that. So Uranus is also in opposition or being opposed by the Mercury as it goes back and forth between your 11th house of your vision for the future and where you're going in the dreams or vision that you have for yourself. And also in terms of gains. And so Mercury going back and forth between the 11th house may have you either testing the notion of going abroad, if that's a vision that you have for yourself of moving, should we, shouldn't we? Or is it more around the notion of the dynamic of finances, meaning that there may be an issue around the gains that you earn from income that you get from what you do, that you may be negotiating. Is it about a child? Is it something that your child is having to grapple with, or your child is costing you money? Mercury in the 12th can be expenses through children. And then again, that's going to be through the opposition. So around the end of October, and again, around the 2nd week of December, there's these oppositions with Mercury and Uranus. And so there can be something insightful or that you're realizing that can also connect you to something that you realize you need to change about your everyday work, what you might be doing, and how with Mercury going into the 12th house, you might recognize patterns that are actually not helpful. Dispersion, for example, over dispersion, doing too much. That's the Gemini in the 6th house. And especially when Mercury goes in the 12th, it will show you where you're dispersed, where you're not focused enough. You need to be more focused. So there's another question for Capricorn, am I overgiving to people who don't deserve my attention? And I don't mean that in a snobby way. It's just like get serious. If you are serious about your goals, you might have to just cut back on whatever, social media, cut back on connections with people. With this energy, I would definitely reconsider how much time you spend on social media. as a theme in your life, this would be a really useful time to reflect on that. Where do I waste time? And where should I pull myself back and like just narrow it down and put myself on one or two platforms and that's it. That might not be relevant to some of you, but certainly if that is, that's definitely part of a useful way of using this energy. All right, there we go. I'd have to see your chart for more. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So for Aquarius, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, and this is all happening in your 10th house of your reputation and your ambition, your career, your vocation, can connect you to your parents or societal pressures and the things that come through the expectations of an authority figure in some way. So there's a lot going on there. There's a whole lot of your attention and energy that is put towards the way that you show up out in the world. And this doesn't matter if you're paid for it. So it can be, again, just how you are showing up in the world. When you step out of your house, what's your reputation like? And so, especially now, very important to focus your attention if you are thinking in terms of career ambitions, to put a lot of attention on where you use your energy. You've got Jupiter in the sixth house, and that can have you overdoing things in a way that feels like this is great, this is the right thing to do, but or working really hard because you're kind of like the money is a big issue. Jupiter rules your second house of resources as well as the 11th house of gains. So you might just feel yourself kind of constantly trading hours for money and really working hard and not really feeling yet the results of what that all represents for you. Certainly that will come through by the July when the North Node moves out of your second. That will feel very different. So this dynamic at this moment can have you really working hard, but also in a way that can feel competitive or driven, and that might put you at odds with your hierarchy, or even the government for that matter. That's also the 10th house. Or there's something that you have to put extra energy in terms of your parents and family. Your ruler, Saturn, is in your second house of your family, and also all of this energy here up in the 10th can represent parents and the need to deal with them or have something that you have to deal with because of them and they are imposing something on you or you're having to deal with their needs. Now, Mercury is going to be opposing Uranus when it moves into your 11th house of your future. So whatever this ambition is and this drive, you're going to have this sense of how it's going to take you into your future or how it's taking you out into society or out into the world or in connection with your friends and groups that are important to you, with shared ideas, for example, and then it retrogrades. And before it does that, it's going to be in opposition to Uranus in your fifth house. And the fifth house is about self-expression. And it can also represent children, of course, and love and your creativity. And it can be an entrepreneurial dynamic as well, especially because you've got North Node and your ruler in the second house and they're going back into the third house. This might have something to do with new business opportunities, which of course then would justify the heavy schedule, for example, with Jupiter in the sixth house. And so this could be where you kind of rethink the future as Mercury then retrogrades and comes back in the 10th house. And it's like, okay, I'm readapting my ambitions now, or I'm readapting the way I show up to do this thing. And then by the time the retrograde cycle is completed, as Mercury goes through the 11th house, then you can more confidently express the thing that you're there to do, because Mercury will also be in the 11th house with Mars. First, Mercury goes in and then retrogrades, then it reconnects with Mars in another conjunction in the 11th house in November. So this is it's a process of maybe putting yourself out there in a new way, potentially with a new audience, because this is something you're on the precipice of doing. That will be the big theme for 2026 for you. I'm doing the 2026 video, so you'll hear more about that. But that's definitely where you're moving towards. So with Venus in a trine to you, there's a lot of support, a lot of harmonious energy here. So whatever this is, your ambition is, it's almost like you're testing it and then coming back and deciding, okay, this is the thing now. Then I come back and I complete that task by December and bring it out fully. All right, so good luck with all of that, and I'll see you in the next video. And for Pisces, Sun, Moon, and Ascendant, this dynamic is in your ninth house trinal to you, very favorable because it's part of this grand water trine, as it is for all of the water signs. You have the North Node in your first house. You have Saturn and Neptune back, and they are trined by Jupiter in your fifth house of good fortune, which is ruling this, which is trining again this Mars and Mercury, which is preparing to, it's in its shadow of the Mercury retrograde cycle. So the Mars Mercury in your ninth house, along with the Sun, Moon, and Black Moon Lilith, are all focusing on your higher purpose and your vision. And it's practical because Mars Mercury is practical. It's like what needs to be done, what actually needs to be sorted. And Mars rules your money house. It rules your second house of your possessions and your resources and your values. And so that's showing that there's something that you're strategizing about that also will impact your income. Um, this is also where Mercury and Mars can be seen to be in the house of the father, for example. So there may be some, especially because the sun is up there at the same time. So there may be something about your father, something to do with um, the dynamic around your father, father's health, or father's experience, or father's influence on you. And that can be very strong at this time. There may be something to do with spirit or religion, or a desire to really focus in on what you believe. What getting really clear. What do I believe? What is supporting me right now? Um, and having that Mars in the ninth is also, it has that very strong, especially with the voice box there of Mercury, gives it an opportunity to really consider the sense of vision and purpose that come with that ninth house. So it really will fire up that North Node for you, taking you into a new sense of self or a new place and how you want to show up. So a really great opportunity over many, many weeks, because it's really from the 21st of October through till the middle of December, or even late December, where you really are able to forecast and plan ahead, and then take out whatever it is that you find important and vital and meaningful, and you bring it out into the public, or you bring it out into your career, or you share it with the boss, and you can test that idea. It's like, this is what is coming, and this is what I have to reconsider, and then I put it back out, and once it's out there, it stays, it sticks. Um, what else can this be? So when Mercury goes across the barrier between the 9th and the 10th, it's going to first oppose the Uranus when it goes in on at the end of October, 29th, 30th of October. It's going to oppose Uranus. It's in your fourth house, and it's in your 10th house. Again, that connects you perhaps to your parents. So there can be some change around the dynamic with your parents, or new awareness around that, or it can be around home and how home and work are relating to each other and what needs to change. Or that can be a realization around your own needs, your psychological or emotional needs, that Uranus is kind of disrupting and showing you. And then Mercury is realizing and saying, I need to show up now in my life in a different way as a result of this awareness. And then Uranus will go, Uranus will go back in your third house, where it has been for the last 7.5 years. And so that's going to be a change, potentially with reference to your local space, your local community, or at the very least also in terms of your mind and how you're communicating things and how you think about things. Third house can be also around choice that needs to be made. That certainly corresponds also to the Mercury part of that story. And then that opposition comes again when Mercury comes back through Taurus, because then once Uranus is back in Taurus from the 7th of November, when Mercury goes back into Scorpio, I meant Scorpio, not Taurus, then that's going to be through November. And I think that's the 29th of, no, the 19th of November. Then you're going to get this opposition again. So there's a lot of reconsidering, and then you go through the details of it. You go through, okay, well, I had this vision, I had this idea, I had this greater idea. This idea, was it too idealistic? Was it too ideological? Was it not practical enough? And this movement back and forth between the 9th and the 10th, especially with the opposition to Uranus, will give you insights into how practical it is, how much you can rely on it, how much you need to perhaps refine and tweak again to make this viable. But then it becomes something important that you can express through who you are out in the world, including your career. Now, Mercury also rules your house of relationship where you have the South Node. And so that also might be part of the sense of who am I in relationship, and is this relationship lasting? Is this the right thing? And so with the ninth house of your vision for your life, like does this person fit into my life? Is this relationship part of the life that I want? That will also be over the course of November. Venus will be moving into your ninth house at the same time as Mercury is going back in. So that contributes to that question. Venus is currently in your eighth house of intimacy, so relatively favorable in principle. But if the consideration is this working? You know, Jupiter in your house of romance and children and so on is also going to be retrograding as part of that groundwater trine. You're figuring out, what do I need? What is my need of the day? And this relationship may be blameless. It's just that it's not the right one. Or you determine that it is absolutely the right one, and then it's a done deal, and we're moving on from this point forward. And whatever it is, it's going to be changing your dynamic around yourself and your relationships, coming from the higher vision for why am I here? All right, Pisces, make the most of this. I wish you all the best, and I see you in the next video. And of course, thank you for listening to this point. I always forget to say this, but please like and subscribe and do all of those lovely things. Share the video if you find it useful. And you can book a consultation with me. That's what I do. And you'll find out more for yourself what is going on in your life. So take good care. Bye-bye.